So hi everybody. I can sort of see some people. I can see a lot of like tiny little people, and I do hear a little bit of feedback, but is everything sounding okay on your end?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just start talking, and if anything goes terribly wrong, you can let me know. So hi, my name is Elisa Baniasad. I'm sorry that I'm not there with you all. I have been to New Zealand once before, and it was a magical experience, and I was really sad that I wasn't able to come this time. But I'm glad that you're all there together, and yeah, and hopefully next time I will be able to come visit. Um, so I'm presenting work that I did together with um, my master's student Noah Hale and a collaborator Kemi Ola, and this is work that has actually been kind of in the works for a really, really long time. In the end, it comprised Noah's thesis work, but what we were looking at was team harmony generally. And then we realized we'd been kind of collecting data for a really long time. And so we decided to take a look at, um, how things changed over the COVID period. Because, of course, when we began collecting data, we hadn't known that there was a pandemic coming. I mean, if we had, we would have bought stock and a whole bunch of stuff. We didn't do that. So I can't tell if people are laughing at my jokes, but I'm just going to imagine that people are because I'm very funny. So I'm just assuming that I'm just absolutely doing an amazing job of humor with your tiny little faces. Anyway, so okay, so about my class. So I teach this class most of the time. A couple of semesters in this period, somebody else taught the class, Reed Holmes. He's a collaborator on many projects and co-developed the materials for this class and was the primary developer of our course project. But the basic gist of the class is that it's your typical sort of upper level, deep introduction to software engineering. So not kind of a second year version of an intro, but a sort of deep introduction to software engineering. We have around 300 students every semester. Sometimes it's split into two sections, sometimes it isn't. We have a course project that runs almost the entire semester. So starting a couple of weeks in, students are paired into teams of two, maximum three, very few teams of three. So really it's paired work. And they work together for the rest of the semester. And that means that we have around 150 teams, which is a lot of teams. And so we have a big team of TAs as well. You can ask Braxton about that. I think Braxton is in the room with you there. Braxton is a longtime TA and also really lead TA and educator on this course as well. So any questions about the class, you can ask Braxton. Braxton knows everything. And so we needed to somehow have a way of checking in with students so that they wouldn't just kind of fall off the map. We had them coming in for meetings with TAs, but there's only so much time in these week-to-week meetings with TAs. So what we would do is we would give students this weekly survey. Every single week we would say, ask them a really quick, like 2 or 3 minute survey about how they were doing in their teams, just to try and understand what was going on. Kind of not just technically, but a little bit more kind of emotionally or practically about their teams. And we also told them that if they didn't answer the survey, well, if so their project grade would be multiplied by the percent of surveys they answered. This is what we told them. So they would receive a tremendously heavy penalty if they skipped any of these. So everybody answers pretty much all of the surveys. And then at the end of the semester, we get a bunch of panicked emails. I think I forgot to answer 2 surveys. Anyway, so we had really, really good response rates because we heavily coerced the students into answering. So what did we ask them? We asked students, so the reason this is uneven is because it's uneven in time. So since for years and years, and including the period that we look at in this work, sort of from the beginning of 2019, but actually even earlier, but our data is a bit more of a mess through then, so we didn't include those semesters in our analysis. We've asked about 3 main sort of practical things. Was the work distribution even or uneven? Was the task allocation like uneven? Was one person influencing all of the tasks? Sort of is one person bullying the other into what work is getting done? And then is somebody dominating the meetings? The reason we ask these questions is because these were the things that people had been complaining about for years, that the work distribution's uneven, or that somebody bosses them around and tells them what to do, or takes all the tasks that are interesting. And then also, somebody doesn't let me get a word in edgewise or something like that. So we started directly asking about those things just because they seemed like indicators of team health. Later, and now this is after COVID has already begun in time. I should have put dates up here. I'm sorry. We asked about 3 more things because people started to complain about new things, which is also interesting, but which we don't delve into in this work. Like, why did they start complaining about this? But they started to talk about how they didn't necessarily feel like they belonged in their groups, or they didn't feel like their ideas were valued, or they didn't feel like their team was functioning just generally well. And I think, that could be partly just the going online. It's very hard to pin down why people started saying that these were the feelings that they were having. But because we heard about those, we added in these questions to try and really pin down what was going on in the teams. So then, and when we were looking at this data, really what we were trying to see was we were trying to identify teams in trouble. We weren't trying to do this as a longitudinal study. So we didn't really set it up like that. But then later, we realized, hey, wait, we actually have the same questions more or less for semester after semester. We could kind of make some charts and see how things, and sort of see how things look through these different periods. So that is what we did. Okay, so let's see. So now I'm going to go through basically all of these different periods, one after the other, just kind of telling the story, and then we're going to very quickly look at how it went overall, and then maybe we can have a chat if there's time at the end. I'm very long-winded, so I often use up all my time just saying things like this, and we can discuss what might have happened. Okay. So first, let's look at what our sort of baseline is, the before COVID period. And remember, we were only asking about work distribution, task allocation, and how much people talked in meetings at that time. So we had basically 3 ratings for each of these questions. Work distribution, was it even, somewhat even, uneven? Was task allocation even to uneven? Talking in meetings, even to uneven. So we sort of bucketed them into, well, they weren't bucketed, they kind of fell into these 3 answers. And then these were the percentages. I don't have a y-axis, I'm sorry. These were the percentages of the responses for each of these questions. So as you can see, most of the groups are actually doing pretty well in all of the measures, especially talking in meetings looks really great. It looks really even. And there are those few groups, though, that are kind of in trouble in each of the semesters. And so remembering again that, we have 150 groups or something, and even though it doesn't look like those red areas are bad, like they're not overwhelming the class, they can overwhelm TA time. So these represent, a few students, a few teams that are going to take up a lot of our time because we're going to have to start fixing their problems. So, we're definitely always trying to drive that number of groups that are in the red down as quickly as we can in the semester. We're constantly fighting against these negative dynamics in these groups. So as soon as a couple of surveys come in for the first couple of weeks of, oh no, like things aren't feeling very good, maybe in the beginning of the semesters, we will start trying to enact change. Like the TAs will suggest having a very strong protocol for when commits are happening, when pull requests are approved, and have a meeting schedule, trying to make the interfaces between the parts, like the components that each of the students is working on, very clear so they don't clobber each other's changes and things like that. So, and then we mentor to those groups. So we're always trying to identify the students that are in trouble and get them out of trouble. So this is kind of how well the teams did overall through the whole semester, or through these 2 semesters before COVID. As you can see, our semesters are sort of weirdly named. These are the semesters basically that start in each of these months. So we have 2 main semesters in our university. We have the one January, February, March, and then exams are in April, and then September, October, November, and then exams are in December. So that's how the semesters go. So remember I said that we're always trying to get things to be better. Well, this sort of tells us how well we did in terms of trying to help students make things better. Oh, sorry, that's my phone ringing. I just have to turn that off. So you know, in the first semester pre-COVID, January of 2019, we can see that very few students degraded. Very few stayed uneven. Some stayed somewhat uneven. A bunch stayed even, and a lot improved. And things got a little bit worse in this semester. Not kind of like looks like almost doubled here. So not great. Things are kind of getting worse. But there is a fair amount of variation here. So, this is just kind of our baseline. It just shows that semesters before COVID, things weren't always 100% the same all the time. There was always change in every semester, given what was going on. It's also kind of, I think in this semester, in that second one, there was probably a little bit of COVID fear happening as well. I think a little bit of that started even before 2020 hit, which is why it's called COVID-19, not COVID-20. And so there was, probably a little bit of unrest happening there, but it was so late in the semester that we didn't manage to catch it in any of our analysis. Okay, so, sorry, okay, there we go. All right, so then we move into 2020 when everything starts to kind of blow up. Once again, we're just asking about work distribution, task allocation, and talking in meetings. And our classes went online on March 16th, which is, I think, really similar to when all kinds of other things started happening. There were just a ton of conferences that kind of shut down, or, all kinds of, big things started to happen. People suddenly started changing places. Students were sent home. All of this transition started to happen. And so the beginning of the semester, for us anyway, was kind of pre-COVID, and the later part was very COVID-y. And we were suddenly online, and suddenly teams had to work online in ways that we, as you all know, none of us ever had before. So this semester suddenly started looking kind of worse than the other semesters. So you can see we have like the two prior semesters in each of these charts, and then we can see that like the red zone has increased, the blue zone has increased, and the green zone has decreased in each of the measures. So this is definitely what it felt like. It felt like things were kind of, all kind of blowing up in exactly the way that you would expect. Then we can also we can kind of zoom in a little bit and see, okay, well, because we were looking at them weekly, we didn't chart the weekly numbers, but we kind of grouped them into the clumps of the different regions of time within the semester. That we have 3 deliverables in our project that are teamwork. And so we kind of took the scores for each of those deliverables and charted those. And you can see as the semester goes along, things start to get worse. So we can see at the beginning of the semester, it was kind of that same, it looked kind of the same as the prior semester, and then things kind of tanked in that late March. Everything kind of started to go badly. So, and that was true for all of the measures, which, I guess doesn't feel surprising. So are people asking questions in the chat? Benjamin, you have how many pairings had mismatched responses? Do you want me to answer that now, or is that a hold question?
At your discretion, and Eli can guide as we go through.
Sure. Can you explain that, just so that if everybody is confused about that one, people won't.
Yeah. So if you're asking both partners to evaluate the partnership, on the one hand, if they both say, yeah, this is a dumpster fire, okay, you can deal with it. But what happens if one of them thinks everything is wonderful?
Right. So actually, when we're looking at this, when we're actually looking at it to try and understand the team dynamics, like when we're trying to help the teams, the view that the TAs see is actually the difference of opinion view. So we say, this person thinks everything's great, this person thinks it's a dumpster fire. For this analysis, however, we actually just dislocated everybody into just their individual feelings. So we didn't try and get a sense of how the teams were actually doing, mainly because what we found is that TAs actually need to work with the people to try and figure out what the reality is, and it's somewhat in the middle, but people usually are reporting how they feel about it. So we didn't do a team by team, how many teams were actually doing well or not. What we just looked at was the way people felt about their teamwork. So all of these are individual responses. Does that make sense?
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So as you can see, everything is starting to tank, which is not surprising at all. It certainly represents my emotional state through this semester. And if we just, if we plot these percentages, you can kind of see, and all of these percentages are very good. The problem is that these numbers are getting worse, and these do represent whole human beings that needed help. So even though 90% of the teams were doing great, the fact that it went from like 5 teams that were doing badly to 10 teams that were doing badly, suddenly we had this extraordinary amount of overhead, which actually Braxton, who was, as I said there, bore the huge brunt of. So Braxton was overseeing a lot of the team fixings, and it was, it was kind of a nightmare because we had such a larger volume of teams to suddenly fix. We had not allocated resources for that increase. So we can see like things were kind of whatever in January, and then we're sort of okay in February, and then everything just started to fall as we transitioned online. And when we look at this recovery, like whether people degraded or stayed uneven or whatever, we can see that things took a dramatic jump. So before we had a little bit of a jump from January 19 to Sept 19, but then, oh, wow, look at that. We've like really increased the number of students who are degrading, and our ability to resolve and heal those teams is clearly doing more poorly. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of move quickly so that we have time at the end. Sorry, I'm really taking a long time with my little charts. During the pandemic then, so this is now, we're online, people are used to it. They shouldn't be shocked anymore. Every semester is now the same for the whole semester. And they're completely online in all of their courses, maybe still living remotely during this time. For most of this, we were just asking about work distribution, task allocation, and talking in meetings. And then halfway through this, I think mostly halfway through, we started asking about these socio-emotional indicators. So how well were the teams doing? This is the work, tasks, and talking. Things actually started to look a little bit better. We can see the work distribution was worse in that transition semester, and then we have a little bit of an improvement here. The green bit is a lot better than before. Harmony is being achieved. Almost looks like it was better than ever. Same thing with task allocation. Look at this, task allocation is super high. And, talking in meetings at least hasn't gotten any worse. It's sort of really staying stable, which is pretty interesting. Almost wonder whether it has to do with the fact that now everybody was online. So it was very, very clear if you were going to be meeting online, maybe Zoom made meetings easier. It's impossible for us to know given our data, but there might be other work out there that answers why this would have improved so very much. Of course, we have a little bit of a downtick here, but this is really a solid number. And then you can see also that our ability to heal teams through this stable sort of during period also got better. So we had a lot more teams improving as things went along. I think, we just got a lot better at working with teams online. And so this was, us kind of hitting our stride. And then for the socio-emotional recovery, we don't have anything to compare this against because this was the first term we'd asked, but as a benchmark, this is how it looked. Most teams got better through the semester in terms of belonging, feeling valued, and functioning, and very, very few were doing poorly. Okay, so now let's look at what happened after restrictions were lifted. So restrictions being lifted for us was actually not that everybody was back in the classroom in our class. We actually stayed online, but people all came back to UBC, and a lot of things were happening in person. Our exams were in person, but all our classes and office hours were online. And but the students could still probably meet with one another. Everybody had to be in Vancouver, so everybody could meet to meet. So maybe it was actually almost, a little bit more complicated, because as we saw that during period where everybody was online, it was very clear where you were going to be meeting, maybe less so here. So what we start to see is that teams actually start doing worse again. Like the green is starting to go back down, the red is starting to increase in all of the behavioral factors, although talking in meetings seems pretty stable. I know that these are really, really tiny numbers. I just want to remind everybody that these small changes make big differences to us because they're entire humans. And also, these are not statistically significant. I'll just say that. Of course they are not, but these never would be in these really, really tiny numbers. But yeah, we start to see a little bit of a downward trend. It's not a trend, but we did feel that we were helping more or we knew that we were helping more groups than we were helping before. And if we look then at the socio-emotional indicators across the, comparing to that semester that was during the pandemic versus the post restrictions, we can see again that everything is starting to kind of get worse. So belonging is starting to get a little bit worse. Ideas are starting to feel a little less valued by some of the people, and the team functioning numbers are starting to get a little bit worse as well. So things aren't getting better and better. Things are actually starting to become less happy. And also our ability to heal teams, to recover teams, is a little worse as well. So it's not as bad as it was in the transitional semester, but it's not going the direction we would have hoped. We're still feeling like we're not making as much of a difference as we were in the prior semester. And again, we really, really feel it when that happens. And here we had these low numbers for degraded teams, and here we see that the degradation is kind of creeping up a little bit. So we still have a lot of teams that were helped, but a few got worse, and we couldn't stop it. In summary, it was a very turbulent time. Obviously, things, we were all up against it, and I think we can all relate to that. Team harmony generally was very, very high, but for those teams that were in trouble, things really, the COVID situation really did affect them. So before the pandemic, things were not exactly always completely stable, but we saw a very clear hit for that transitional semester, and then a clear sort of recovery. And by clear, I mean like sort of intuitively clear, not statistically clear. Then a sort of leveling off here. And then once the restrictions were lifted and people came back, and maybe life got a little bit more chaotic again, things started to get worse. So that is, we don't necessarily have explanations for those things other than it was COVID, and life was difficult. So that's actually my whole presentation. The take home point was people really did not like that transition semester, and also people are getting, I think, quite tired. People seemed in the chats and in classes to be complaining more and more about burnout, and we kind of wonder if that final post period is that the hit that people were taking was really about that burnout, just the exhaustion, and people really just unable to cope anymore. It was an emotional semester for a lot of people, I think. Anyway, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed presenting. I hope that was all clear and that my microphone held up through all that. Happy to take questions anytime.
All righty, thank you so much. So we do have some time for questions. Please go ahead.
I'm in the live audience. I have a question.
Oh, great. I can't quite hear you, so
Maybe type your question in the chat window.
Thank you.
Yeah, or you could. Yeah, I don't know how the room works, so however it works is fine with me.
While they're typing their question in, I have one other one.
Awesome.
How much intuitive, ballpark feelings here? How much do you think it is because the students you're seeing now are students who didn't get a freshman year in college because it was all remote, and didn't learn how to college?
Right. Well, these would be third-year students, so they would have had, let's see. Oh
Right,
yeah,
third
yeah,
year
good
students would
point.
have
Yeah, you're
freshman
right.
and
Yeah, good
sophomore.
point. That's right. Exactly. They would have been brand new. That's a really, really good point that we didn't actually think about, that they're like, wow, I'm in a big university with 60,000 people all around me. Like it's, yeah, absolutely. And I think, but it's interesting because the students who were talking in the forums and in classes, and because I would do all these emotional check-ins and I would sort of say like, how's everybody doing? People were just like, we're just so tired. We're so tired. We just can't deal with work anymore. We are just it just feels overwhelming, and the number of requests for accommodations really went up. And I think so. I don't know that it's just Team Harmony that was affected, and it could also be the fact that they never got that human in-person introduction to being in a university. I guess the weird thing though was that I also felt like that. And I know a lot of my faculty colleagues and the TAs also felt like that. Like Braxton, you probably felt like that too. Like it was very, I felt really burned out. I still kind of feel really burned out. So yeah, I think that could have been an effect for sure. But that wouldn't, but I feel like it's just this whole cocktail of really problematic factors with this whole COVID period, where people are actually getting worse and worse off. Can't pinpoint it, but it is interesting to see it in a chart. I know that doesn't answer your question. I'm sorry.
No, it's just been something I've been speculating for years, trying to figure out
like
what's going on with our students.
Yeah, I mean, it's a puzzle for sure. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about.
Does the audience have a question? He can ask his own question.
Yeah, I was saying I enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much. My question, what I am assuming is that you did all this as part of your assessment of group work, and it was all done through surveys. I was wondering, do you have any thoughts on how you can assess group work through more direct measurements? Do you have any ideas at all, or do you know of any work related to that problem? That is something that we face in my institution.
Right. So assessing, sorry, so I'm just gonna, can somebody repeat the question? I'm not sure I heard the subtleties of the question, and it seemed like there were a couple subtleties.
Yeah. I'm asking
more energy to give feedback and students more energy to receive feedback, missing the casual face-to-face experience. I mean, would you agree, with that assessment?
Oh, that seems like a different question. So the question that I thought I heard just spoken was, how do you assess groups generally? Is that like beyond just talking to them? Is that sort of the question that you had, or
how do you assess,
or is it the one that's in the chat? Sorry.
So how do you assess group work through direct measurements? Because they all
right.
That's my question.
Yeah. Okay. So I think in our class, and Braxton probably has 1,000 thoughts on this actually, and we'll be talking a little bit about assessment of the same class actually. We can look at things like commits. We can look at numbers of tests that were made to pass during commits, but we haven't yet figured out exactly how to tie those exactly to value, but we're working on it. So we can, there are a number of indicators that we can get through GitHub contributions, and that's sort of a more objective way to assess, although it's not lossless, to assess what students are contributing to teams. We don't use, I just wanted to point out, this wasn't in your question, but I just wanted to point out, we're not using these responses actually to grade the students directly. So sometimes if a student really does absolutely nothing, then we will give them a penalty, or we'll take away their entire project grade or something because they just ghosted the entire semester. But we don't tell students that they're grading their partner. We just say, just tell us about your experience, and so that they don't feel a sense of hesitation about taking grades away from their colleague. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I'd be more than happy to chat about that offline though, because I think it's a really big topic. And also you should chat with Braxton too, because we've really looked into that a lot. So the question in the chat is, it takes instructors more energy to give feedback and students more energy to receive feedback, missing the casual face-to-face experience. Sort of, can somebody elaborate on that question? Like is that a comment, or did you want me to talk about what my thoughts are about that? Ah, wonderful. Yes, I agree, Dennis. I totally agree. It does take a lot of energy. This is actually why, this is why we started doing the surveys, because it scaled very, very poorly. We were just, we were unable to scale ourselves and our commentary and our discussion around the efficacy of the teams. And so we just needed a way to identify the teams that were in the red, basically, very, very quickly, so that we could target them. That was our approach. And then, we could focus on those teams.
We really have to move to our next talk, but I do have one more question, like real quick one. That's kind of, it might seem a bit unrelated to the actual study, but as you were describing your experiences, one thing that struck me, that many software companies, now some of them, they insist that their software engineers get back to the office, while others are willing to be more flexible and allow to people to continue working remotely if that's what they prefer. Based on what you've observed, based on your insights, I mean, do you have any recommendations for these companies? Which route, would you endorse?
Right. Well, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what caused the positive outcomes here, like during the restrictions, this kind of period of goodness, right, where things were really doing quite well. It's almost like if everybody really knows how to do the work, like if everybody is able to work within the protocol and it's a very clear protocol, then online work can be effective in terms of group functioning. We didn't look at, I think our grades all sort of stayed the same. Maybe Braxton can comment on that about, we did change the project teensy weensy bits, so maybe they're not easy to compare. But when I did my cursory analysis, I didn't see large differences in the performance of the teams across the semesters. There didn't seem to be any major impact for performance of the teams, which is interesting. So the teams were doing more or less as well as every other semester, but the harmony of the teams in doing so got better as we were online and achieved peak bestness while totally online. I actually think because of the clarity of the situation. Everybody knew everybody where everybody would be, and there was never any question. And you could never say, I can't go to that meeting, because actually everybody was locked in their houses. So there could be part of it as well. So maybe that's the problem, is that now that people are working from home and they're allowed to leave their houses, maybe like this is a different protocol again.
Well, thank you so much. Let's thank the speaker virtually. So thank you so much, Alicia.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.